Hello everyone! Today, I'm going over a budget commander deck that I've brewed around Wick, the Whorled Mind. As usual, I've designed this deck to list for less than $45 at the time of recording, using prices listed by Scryfall, which includes our basic lands at 10 cents each, but that price doesn't include costs such as shipping. Regardless, Wick, the Whorled Mind, is a 2/4 legendary rat warlock costing 3 generic and a black to cast, and has it so when Wick or another rat enters the battlefield under your control, you make a 1/1 black snail token if you don't already control a snail, and if you do control a snail, you put a +1/+1 counter on a snail that you control. And then Wick has an activated ability costing a blue, black, and red mana, and that you sack a snail, which has Wick deal damage equal to that snail's power to each opponent, and that you draw cards equal to that sack snail's power. Which honestly just sounded like a really fun rats commander to me. So for this deck, we're going to look to cast a ton of low-cost rat creatures to progressively grow our snail, which we'll sack every so often to refill our hands and start that process all over again, while growing our board of rats wider and wider. We'll also look to include a few non-rat creatures that produce rat creature tokens, as Wick works off of any rat entering the battlefield under our control, along with a few non-permanent sources for rat tokens, and some changelings with useful abilities, which would act as both a rat and a snail for this deck. But with that quick deck summary, let's jump into the 99 of this deck, starting with our ramp. First up is Wayfarer's Bauble, which can be sacked to tutor a basic land onto the battlefield tapped, which can definitely help with early game color fixing. And then we have Talisman of Creativity, Dominance, and Indulgence to get access of mana with the 3 color pairs of this deck, at the cost of pinging ourselves for 1 damage. But we could access generic mana for no self-damage. And since this is a fairly heavily black-centered deck, we also have Dimir and Rakdos Signet to give us more access to black mana, while still splashing blue or red, respectively. Then Felwar Stone is likely to tap for at least a couple of our colors, and Arcane Signet will tap for any color that we need. And finally, Thought Vessel and Decanter of Endless Water tap for generic and any color we want, respectively, but also give us access to no maximum hand size, which could be nice if we happen to sack a particularly large snail. But now, let's move on to the massive amount of rat creatures that we have in this deck to fuel our snails. Starting with our 1-drops, Typhoid Rats is simply a 1/1 with Death Touch. Gnawing Vermin has a target player mill 2 cards and then gives -1/-1 to each creature we don't control for the turn when it dies. Nezumi Linebreaker makes a 1/1 mercenary creature token when it dies, which that token can be tapped to buff a creature for the turn, such as maybe that snail right before you sack it. And then Nap Miser reduces the max hand size of our opponents by 1. Now moving on, Shoreline Looter and Rancid Rats are 1/1s with some evasion built in. The former simply can't be blocked, and the latter has Skulk, so it can't be blocked by creatures with greater power than it. Shoreline Looter also has you draw a card if it deals combat damage to a player, but you discard unless you have 7 or more cards in your graveyard, and Rancid Rats has Death Touch. Then we have Nezumi Cutthroat and Tangled Colony, which can't block, but the former can only be blocked by artifact or black creatures, and the latter makes X 1/1 black rat creature tokens when it dies, with X being the damage dealt to it that turn. Blightbilly Rat is a 2/2 with Toxic 1, giving players a poison counter when it connects, while also letting you proliferate when it dies. Then Ravenous Rats has a target player discard a card when it enters the battlefield, and Nezumi Informant, Rotting Rats, and Burglar Rat have each opponent discard a card when they enter the battlefield, though note that Rotting Rats also has us discard. Refurbished Familiar also has our opponent's discard upon it entering, but it also has us draw if an opponent can't discard, and has flying and affinity for artifacts. Then Swarm of Rats has power equal to the number of rats you control, Pack Rat has power and toughness equal to the number of rats you control, but can let you discard a card with 3 mana to make a token copy of Pack Rat, and Persistent Marsh Stalker is a 3/1 that gets +1 power for each other rat you control, while also having a method to bring it back from the graveyard. Then Voracious Vermin and Lord Skitter's Butcher can make a 1/1 black rat creature token that can't block when they enter the battlefield, though the latter could also let you scry 2 and draw 1 if you sack another creature, or give your creatures menace for the turn, while Voracious Vermin grows whenever another creature you control dies. Then Mind Whisker has you surveil 1 at the beginning of your upkeep, which can help with cleaning the top of your library, while giving our opponent's creatures -1 power, so long as you have 7 or more cards in your graveyard. Kuromonix, the Rat King, has Toxic 1, and gives our other rats Toxic 1, but Kuromonix also has you look at the top 5 cards of your library upon entering the battlefield, having you reveal any number of rat cards from among them, which you can put into your hand, with the rest going onto the bottom of your library in a random order. And finally, Vren the Relentless and Lord Skitter, Sewer King, can produce a bunch of rat tokens while also being rats themselves. Vren exiles our opponent's creatures when they die, where Vren then makes as many 1/1 rat tokens as creatures exiled that turn at the start of each end step, with those rats getting +1/+1 for each other rat you control, and Lord Skitter making a 1/1 black rat creature token that can't block at the start of your combat phase, and exiling a target card from an opponent's graveyard whenever a rat enters the battlefield under your control. But now let's move on to our non-rat sources of rat tokens, and a few shapeshifters. First up, Piper of the Swarm gives our rats menace, and can be tapped with 2 mana to make a 1/1 black rat creature token, and if you wish, it could also be tapped with 4 mana while sacking 3 of our rats to take control of a target creature. Mad Ratter simply makes 2 1/1 black rat creature tokens whenever you draw your second card in a turn, so a good way to get started on your next snail. And then Ogre Slumlord and Totentan's Swarm Piper also make rat creature tokens when one of our non-token creature dies. Though Ogre Slumlord doesn't do this on its own death, with the Slumlord also inherently giving our rats Death Touch, and Totentan's having an activated ability to temporarily give one of our attacking rats Death Touch. Ratcatcher Trainee can make 2 rat tokens with its adventure instant, Pest Problem, while Song of Totentans is an X-cost spell having you make X 1/1 black rat creature tokens that can't block, and giving our creatures haste for the turn. Gnawing Crescendo gives our creatures +2 power for the turn, but we also make 1/1 rat creature tokens that can't block for any of our non-token creatures that die that turn. And then we have 3 Shapeshifters with Changeling, so they count as both rats and snails in this deck, with Changeling Outcast, Bloodline Pretender, and Taurian Mauler. Changeling Outcast is simply a 1/1 that can't block or be blocked. Bloodline Pretender has you choose a creature type upon it entering the battlefield, and then gets a +1/+1 counter whenever another creature with that type enters the battlefield under your control, and Taurian Mauler gets a +1/+1 counter whenever an opponent casts a spell. Now I'd like to quickly mention 2 cards that don't fit amazingly into the other chapters, which are Ghostly Flicker, having you exile 2 artifacts, creatures, and or lands you control and immediately returning them under your control, which can be used to dodge targeted removal, or to simply flicker 2 of our rats to get more snail counters. And Shared Animosity, which gives attacking creatures that we control +1 power until the end of the turn for each attacking creature sharing a creature type with it. And well, we'll have plenty of rats to attack with while growing our snail. But now it'd be a bit of a risk to leave our draw entirely on Wick and our snails, so I'd like to go over a relatively small pile of cards that'll help us keep our hands somewhat filled during potentially sad times. First up, Distant Melody could provide a huge amount of draw in one go, as it has you choose a creature type and draw a card for each permanent of that type that you control. And then Sign in Blood and Night's Whisper have you, or target player, draw 2 and then lose 2 life. Then Village Rites and Corrupted Conviction have you sack a creature while casting it to draw 2 cards, and Deadly Dispute has you sack a creature or an artifact, then draw 2 and make a treasure token. But now let's move on to the spells that we can use to interact with what our opponents are doing. First up are a few counterspells, with Counterspell countering any spell for 2 blue, and then Counter Squall, Negate, and Unwind counter non-creature spells, with Counter Squall also having the spell's controller lose 2 life, and Unwind having you untap 3 lands, which in a way is paying for itself. Then Go for the Throat and Doomblade destroy a target non-artifact or non-black creature, respectively, while Feed the Swarm lets you destroy an opponent's target creature or enchantment, though you lose life equal to its mana value. Croesus Charm gives you some options, letting you either return a permanent to its owner's hand, destroy a target non-black creature, or destroy a target artifact. And then Shunt and Return the Favor let us change the target of a target spell with a single target, which could be useful to dodge a targeted destroy spell, with the latter also giving you the option to copy an instant, sorcery, activated, or triggered ability, and choose new targets for that copy. And then we have a couple of board wipes with Blasphemous Act and Swarmyard Massacre, with the former dealing 13 damage to each creature and costing 1 less to cast for each creature on the battlefield, and the latter making 2 1/1 squirrel tokens, and then gives each creature that isn't an insect, squirrel, spider, or rat -1/-1 till the end of the turn for each creature that you control that is an insect, squirrel, spider, or rat. But now that we've gone through all the spells in this deck, let's go over our land base. First up for land tutor lands, we have Shire Terrace and Promising Vein, which tap for generic and can be sacked with 1 mana to tutor a basic land onto the battlefield tapped. While Seething Landscape can be simply tapped and sacked to tutor a basic island, swamp, or mountain onto the battlefield tapped, and Myriad Landscape can be sacked to tutor 2 basic lands of the same type onto the battlefield tapped. Then moving on to our dual tapped lands, I'll start with the slow lands Sunken Hollow and Smoldering Marsh, which tap for Dimir and Rakdos colors respectively, and can enter untapped if you control 2 or more basic lands. And then Drowned Catacomb, Dragon Skull Summit, and Sulphur Falls, tapping for Dimir, Rakdos, or Izzet colors respectively, and each entering the battlefield untapped if you control a land with a basic land type that aligns with the colors that they tap for. Then we have the scry tap lands of Temple of Deceit, Malice, and Epiphany. Then we have Crumbling Necropolis, a Triumph tapping for any of our 3 colors, but entering tapped. And then Exotic Orchard is likely to tap for at least a few of our colors in your average Commander game, while Path of Ancestry and Command Tower will tap for any of the colors we need. And Reliquary Tower taps for generic, but gives us access to no max hand size as well. And then we'll fill the rest of this deck with 9 swamps, 5 islands, and 5 mountains. But now that we've gone through all 100 cards in this deck, let's take a look at that price. And as you can see here, this deck is currently listing just under $45 at the time of recording, which does include our basic lands at 10 cents each, but doesn't include costs such as shipping. But now I'd like to suggest a few cards to get you started if you're looking to upgrade this deck with a bit higher budget. First up, Marrow Gnawer can give an insane amount of rat creature token generation, while also giving all rats fear. As you can tap it and sack a rat to create a number of 1/1 rat creature tokens equal to the number of rats you already control. Valley Rock Caller, when played late enough, might just drain people out, but can still be a massive life swing if you've gotten a bunch of rats out. Ayara, First of Locthwain, and Skull Clamp can give you some decent access to draw outside of Wick, while Ayara also does a bit of life drain, life gain when a black creature enters the battlefield under your control. Panharmonicon will double up on Wick's trigger, making a big ol' snail even faster, and Kindred Dominance can be a solid, somewhat one-sided board wipe since we can keep our rats on the board. But it's about time I wrapped up this video, so if you'd like to build, adapt, upgrade, or otherwise play with this deck, the link, as always, is in the description down below. If you liked the video, consider dropping it a like, and maybe consider subbing if you'd like more budget commander decks in your feeds. Regardless, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.